nothing was more controversial in our editorial than our 90-10 rule, or aspiration is a better word than rule, regarding the virtual biotech's finances. And as Bob just mentioned, variabilized costs. I know we thought hard about putting that in specifically, but then Bob, actually, I think after the fact, you also went and did some more follow-up research on this. So take your time and tell us, before we get to questions, tell us about this aspirational financial goal for virtual biotechs that you've devised over the years, the so-called 90-10 aspiration.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. It was, it was a provocative. It was provocative to actually put this kind of number in there, and we were purposely being provocative here. I think the idea and what Lewis is saying about being an aspirational target is to really think about the contrast between a traditional biotech model and one that is trying to get to be as close to a pure play virtual biotech as possible. And of course, I think that that's asymptotic, right? I don't think, and maybe you don't ever want to get there, but you have to understand from a finance point of view that in the way that I think about how companies are structured, I'm always thinking about the utilization of capital and how much of that capital is actually going to advance and grow the value of the business, and how much of that capital is actually going to things that are fixed cost and are low value or no value add costs that just come along for the ride. And that's sort of that drain in your bathtub. If you have a huge high overhead and you are running, and you've got the most expensive building, and you've got all kinds of things that are added into your company, those expenses come no matter what is happening with your programs. They continue. It's a recurring charge that you've taken on. And so that drain is fairly wide open in the traditional model. If you're aspiring to be a much more pure play virtual biotech, then what you really want to be focusing on is narrowing down that drain. And so when we said 90-10, 90 meant we want to be 90% or aspiring to get as high a mark on the variabilized costs and the costs that actually go directly to increasing or growing the value of your company. And the 10% would be that very low fixed cost. And this is an ideal model, right? The interesting thing when I really started looking into what traditional biotechs and traditional pharma companies, and then even companies outside of our industry, is that it's kind of upside down. So in the traditional model, you can pretty much expect 25 to 30% of costs that are intended to directly impact the value of the company are in the minority, and the vast majority, say 70, 75%, are going towards these recurring fixed costs. And so the idea of moving yourself as close as you possibly can, I don't know theoretically if you can ever get to a 90-10, but trying to get yourself as far to that mark as possible will ensure that when that precious capital comes into your biotech, that you are using it as efficiently as possible, because the vast majority of it is going towards something that should increase the value of your company, and you're using sparingly small amounts to actually do your overhead. So one of the things in a purely virtual biotech is that you may also be completely virtual yourself, right? And that meaning that you don't own a building, you don't pay rent or actually a mortgage or anything on that. And so while everybody's working remotely, that's a huge expense. And I know and have talked with and even advised other companies that were doing startups, and their biggest expenses come with hiring and come with their domicile, where they're going to build, what they're going to build, or trying to rent out huge swaths of laboratory space and others. Those expenses really raise the amount of capital that's necessary. And in a biotech that's a startup, the one thing that the venture capital and others are going to want to know is that you've shortened as much as possible the timeline for return on that capital. And number two, the vast majority of it went into things that grew the company's value and returned it back. And depending upon what you value as your company, that's where you need to invest. And so, you wouldn't try to outsource something that is a defining, differentiating capability of your company, but you would want to be outsourcing, and I'll list a couple of brief things, right? Unless you're a software provider or a software developer, you would not want to basically hire in an entire IT department to run. You can actually contract for IT services and variabilize that cost. When you don't need the services, you're not paying for them. When you need them, you pay for them. And so this is the concept of the 90-10. It's aspirational, but what you really want to do is you want to be flipping this thing so that the majority of your capital is going towards value creation.